Okay, so Parsha's Balak. So tonight, in tonight's offering, I actually only have two pieces, but the first one is a slightly longer piece. And if I were to say to you where I got this piece from, I think I'd give a person 100 guesses for a Parsha Shiur where this comes from. But it's actually a piece from Rabbi in the Avi Ezri. The Avi Ezri is his famous work, which is a sefer on the Rambam. And it's tremendous lomdus, and it's very yeshivish sefer. And to find a geschmacka piece on the Parsha is not really the place you wouldn't look in the Avi Ezri. But someone referred to this, showed me this a while ago, and there's an amazing piece that has to do with the whole nevuah of Bilam in the Avi Ezri, and we'll see, we'll explore it. It's a very, very interesting piece. Okay, let's begin with box number one, the famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, which makes reference to our Parsha, Parsha's Balak. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says in Parak Hey Mishnah Yotes, Kol, first box. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. Kol misha yesh b'yodei shleisha dvarim halalu. Anyone who has the following three characteristics: mitalmidu shel Avram Avinu, he is a student of Avram Avinu. V'shleisha dvarim acherim mitalmidu shel Bilam Harasha, he is a student of Bilam Harasha. What are these midas? Ayin tova, he has a good eye. Ruach nemoicha, he has a lowly spirit. V'nefesh shefela, and a humble soul. Mitalmidu shel Avram Avinu, then he is a talmid of Avram Avinu. Ayin roya, on the other hand, if he has if he has an evil eye, v'ruach gavoya, and a haughty spirit, v'nefesh rechava, and a very boastful, arrogant soul, mitalmidu shel Bilam Harasha, then he is a talmid of Bilam Harasha. Says the Mishnah, ma bein talmidu shel Avram Avinu letalmidu shel Bilam Harasha. What is the difference between the two? Which is a very strange question, because you just told us the differences, right? In previous Parsha Shiurim, we've discussed that. So the Mishnah concludes, the students of Avram Avinu enjoy not only the world to come, but this world as well. Okay, and we discussed that previously in previous Parsha Shiurim. I'm sure you will remember all the details and see the previous sheets for details. But says the Avi Ezri, says Reb Shach, what a strange comparison. We're comparing chalk and cheese. Whenever you've got a comparison, you want to compare, two different types of fruit to each other. Two different cars to each other. They've got similarities between them, but surely there are no commonalities between between Avram Avinu, and Bilam. How can you compare them? Says the Avi Ezri, and again, it's a much longer piece, and he's got, I think, 9 questions. I've just taken 2 of them just to try and just to try and condense what he's saying. Darshu Chazal, in the second box, V'loikom k'Moshe, Chazal say that there was no Navi, like Moshe Rabbeinu b'Yisrael, Umas ha'olam kam umanu Bilam. And who was the person in Umas ha'olam? It was Bilam. Kasha l'shmoya lidmois tumah l'tahara. He said it's difficult to even hear this. How can we compare tumah and tahara, Bilam and Avram Avinu? What's the comparison? Second of all, Ma'isad kadaitich the Bilam. What was Bilam's havamina? What was he thinking? L'leches l'kalal Yisrael v'Hashem yisparach lo yisa'ar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Bilam, do not go and curse the Jewish people. So how could Bilam have a havamina? Could he have thought that I'm going to go and curse the Jewish people? Hashem said, don't go. Now, to answer these questions, we need to learn a Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Yesodei Torah, Perek Zayin Halacha Vav, says the Rambam, famous Rambam, again a longer piece, and I've just extracted the key points that we need. Kol hadvarim shemarnu hem derech nevuah l'chol hanavim harishonim. The Rambam there in Hilchos Yesodei Torah is talking about nevuah, and he says all the attributes of which I have explained till now is talking about all the neviim, rishonim v'achronim, of all the neviim to date. Chutz m'Moshe Rabbeinu, except for Moshe Rabbeinu. Rabbon shel kol hanavim, who is the master of all neviim. U'ma hefresh ben nevuas Moshe l'shar kol hanavim. What is the difference between the nevuah of Moshe and everyone else? Shekol hanavim b'chaloim. He's going to list a few differences. All other neviim, they have their prophecies b'chaloim, in a dream, or b'mareh, on some sort of vision. Or Moshe Rabbeinu misnabev v'hu ar v'omed. Moshe Rabbeinu, on the other hand, he was wide awake and he was standing up. Next one. Kol hanavim alidei malach. All the other neviim, they dreamt by way of a malach. Lefichach roim mashem roim b'moshel v'chidol. They saw by way of a parable, by way of a riddle. Moshe Rabbeinu lo alidei malach shnema peh el peh adaber bo. Moshe Rabbeinu was not through or by way of a malach. It was directly speaking kaviyachol HaKadosh Baruch Hu kolema she'ein sham moshel. There was no parable. El roya hadova al buriyoi. Moshe Rabbeinu would see it directly, clearly. B'loi chida, b'loi mashal, not in the form of a riddle or some sort of mashal, some sort of parable. Hu shater meida alav b'marev v'lo b'chida she'einoi misnabe b'chida. He would not prophesy through a riddle. El b'marev she'roya hadova al buriyoi. He would see things absolutely clearly. Next chiluk, third one. Next paragraph. Kol hanavim yereim v'nivholim. All the other Nevi'im, when they received the Nevuah, they were trembling, they were scared. Or mismoigin, or Moshe Rabbeinu einake. Moshe Rabbeinu was not like that. That's number 3. Number 4. Kol hanavim eimis labim b'cholei sheyirtzu. All the other Nevi'im, they couldn't just prophesy whenever they wanted to. Moshe Rabbeinu einake was not like that. Ela kol zman sheyachbo yitzruach hakodesh levashta. Whenever he wanted to have a Nevuah and speak, as it were, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Ruach HaKodesh just sort of clothed him. For Nevuah Shoire Alav, and prophecy descended upon him. For Ein Tzorech Lechavin Daito, he doesn't have to sort of get himself ready, or Lizdamin Lo Shari Ein, Hu Mechuvan U'Mezuman V'Omet. He was always ready to go when it came to Nevuah. Kamalochi Ashar, it's like an angel. Lefich Mistabe B'Cholei Shnema, Omdu Eshma Ma Yisav Hashem Lachem. He could therefore tell people, just wait and I'll go and speak to Hashem. He was just in a state of readiness to accept Nevuah whenever he wanted. Very interesting. That's what it means. After Har Sinai, after Matan Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Emor lohem, you, Moshe Rabbeinu, go tell the rest of Klal Yisrael, Shuvu lochem lo aleichem, go back to your tents. Va'ato, and you, Moshe Rabbeinu, Pai amoid imodi, you stay here. What does that mean? Halamadata shekol neviim, kasha nevuah mistalekes. All other neviim, when the nevuah was over, when it left, they would go back to their tents. They would be like regular people. They would go back and they would be involved in the physical world like anybody else. And therefore they did not have to separate from their wives. Because it says, the rest of the world go back to the Ahaleim, they go back to regular life. You stay here. I.e., Moshe Rabbeinu he doesn't go back to his original tent. He's therefore separated from his wife forever. He connected his mind to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He never distanced himself. He never lost that connection. When he became holy Malachim, etc., etc., etc. That's a very famous Rambam in Hilchos Yesodei Torah. Good. Now, the Avi Ezri, like I said, is a pirush on the Rambam. So on that Rambam in Hilchos Yesodei Torah, Perek Zayin Halacha Vav, there's a beautiful piece of Reb Shach, the Avi Ezri. Let's go through it. Hanovi mistakel b'nafshe, the bottom box. The Novi mistakel b'nafshe v'yodei hapisarim. A Novi looks into himself and he sees, he understands the interpretation of a dream. V'afal pikein hari zedoim lemabit bezuchuchis. You know what it's like, he says? It's like looking through a glass. Im hazuchuchis savua yorik, if the glass happens to be tinted green, Edoim, red, Tzohuv, gold, Tcheles, purple, everything will look green, Adumim, red, whatever it is. You're wearing red lenses, everything will look red. You wear green lenses, everything will look green. You're not seeing anything different, you're just seeing whatever you're looking at through the lens which you're looking through. Kain ha'inin benovi. So too with the Nevuah, says Reb Shach. Kol shenafshi zaka. Over here, when your nefesh, when your neshama is clean, is pure, you'll see things beautifully clearly. Next paragraph. That's what it's saying about Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu saw things, the Mefarshim call it ispaklaria me'ira, with a perfectly clear lens. He saw it because he was such a neshama of such a high level. It was polished to such a degree that he saw things with absolute perfection. Not that other Nevi'im prophesies falsehood, because they say that a chaloim is a dream. When you and I have dreams, we wake up in the morning, we had a dream that night. The Chazal say a chaloim is echod meshishim b'nevuah, is 1/60th of a nevuah. A 60th is always an example given to a semblance, a smell of something. So for example, when you're cooking a chulent and you're having a cup of tea and a bit falls in, some milk or whatever falls in, so if it's less than 60 amounts, it's going to cause you a problem. But if it's more than 60, you can ignore it, because it doesn't affect the action. Well, a 60th is always an example of something which sort of just is a semblance of. And therefore, a chaloim, a dream is some form of, it gives us an idea, a smell of what a nevuah is like. V'chein, hoyagam sham, rak the chaloim ba b'roiv inyan, u'ma'at emes ma'urav. It's just that when we have a dream, 95% of the dream is nonsense, 5% is true. So, it could be that I'm abseiling down the Empire State Building, and I happened to see on the 37th floor a friend of mine who I was in New York, who I was in yeshiva with. And I mentioned him the day earlier, so he was in my mind, and so 95% is nonsense, abseiling down the Empire State Building, but the 5% is that I know a friend who works in New York or something like that. So 5% is MS. And you don't quite the interpretation of the dream because so little of it is MS and so much is sheker. And yet we say the chaloim, a dream, goes after the interpretation. And then now feed that back to a nevuah. Everything goes according to the interpretation, the way you perceive it. In other words, the nevuah is very much processed through your own filter. You being, and the filter being the purity of your own neshama. Time, the next paragraph, move on. Therefore, we can now therefore understand the Chazal which says a gezeira of a novi chezeres. The decree of a novi can be retracted. The Urim v'Tumim ain't a chezeres, but a decree of the Urim v'Tumim can never be retracted. What's the difference? Anything which comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly, ein a chezer, can never be retracted. Rak the benovi, the kech acher me'urav boy, but if it comes through a novi, where it's going through the filter of the novi, through his own perspective, his lens, whichever color it may be, then something else is sort of intermingled within it. Pitarin shekol seichel ha'anoshi, i.e., human intellect interpretation. Imkein yitachin she is battle. So therefore it can be annulled. Amazing. In other words, when a novi sees something, it comes through his own perspective. In the same way that you look through a lens, however, whatever color your lens is, you'll see it as it is. So a novi sees it through the clarity and the purity of his own perspective, outlook, persona, etc., his own midas. Masha Enkein, an Urim v'Tumim, which is the direct word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so that can never be rescinded. But if you've got a human intellect intertwined within it, that can be rescinded. Now, we'll see how this all fits into Bilam. We'll move on. I'm in the bottom paragraph. HaKadosh Baruch Hu thought, you know what? I can give a nevuah to Bilam, and it will be filtered through his lowly soul, his disgusting soul. Nefesh rechava v'ayin ra, like the Mishnah says, it's a very haughty, arrogant spirit, and an ayin ra, a negative, critical perspective on everything. Yoda she'hapisrenos shebenafshe ra Yisrael. The trouble was, if he gave that prophecy to Bilam, it would be channeled in a very negative, horrible, oppressive way towards the Jewish people. So therefore, so what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? He gave the brachas to Bilam mefurish, explicitly. Hainu, lo b'nevuah mevarcham sheyochel isbatel, not through a nevuah. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu's perspective was ispaklaria hameira, a perfectly clear vision. So therefore, he was going to give a same nevuah to Bilam, but the trouble, the danger was, he'll see it through his corrupted, negative, dangerous vision, and he'll redirect this bracha of Matov Alecha Yisrael, etc., and he'll redirect it as he wanted to as a curse, because that's the filter through which Bilam is looking through, because he has such a negative, horrible soul. HaKadosh Baruch Hu therefore says, you know what? I'm going to give you ispaklaria me'ira, which means it's going to be a direct nevuah, which means you cannot interpret it any other way. It will have to be interpreted exactly as I intended the bracha. That's why Bilam was given Nevuah on a par with Moshe Rabbeinu. Leikom b'Yisrael k'Moshe, but b'umas kom. In what respect? In respect that they both had Ispaklari Me'ira. And the reason why he gave Bilam Ispaklari Me'ira, the perfect vision, is because there was a big danger in him doing it like a regular Novi, because otherwise he would filter everything in a very damaging way against Klal Yisrael. Now, with that, says he had the ability, yes, he had powers of Nevuah, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu sort of put him on a level of Moshe Rabbeinu.
But why give him that? What if he's bad?
I suppose because that's a separate question, but I think it could be that
you have to be to get Nevuah, you have to do a whole lot of processes to be able to have any.
Correct. So the Rambam then explains how you have to process it, but it's again so that the Umas Oilim, like Rashi brings in the Parsha, would not have any tightness against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hey, you've given the Jewish people someone with these amazing abilities. What about us? So he's got it. And he's got it even on a par with Moshe Rabbeinu.
His whole life or just at that point?
I don't know. How did he work to get there? I'm not sure. I don't know what point he got it. I don't know. But listen to this. Then, with this, we can now explain the Akedah. Now, the Akedah is not Moshe Rabbeinu, of course. The Akedah is Avraham Avinu. What's it got to do with the Akedah? This is amazing. Look at this. Look at the top of the next page. Now we can understand the Goydel, the greatness of the Nisayon of the Akedah. It's a very strange thing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Avram. He said to him categorically, take Yitzchak and offer him up. There's no ambiguity there. HaKadosh Baruch himself has got the ability to kill and to give life. How could Avraham Avinu contemplate ever going against the will of Hashem? If HaKadosh Baruch Hu instructs you explicitly, do X, Y, or Z, you do it. Why is this called a Nisayon? HaKadosh Baruch Hu has told him to do something. There's no wiggle room. There's no room to say maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu meant X, Y, or Z. How else can you interpret? Take your son, your loved one, etc., etc. Where's room for ambiguity? Why is this even called an Nisayon? Says Rav Shach, the next paragraph. In light of the above, the truthful words that I've said, it's beautiful, I can explain it so well. Who had Ispaklari Me'ira? Who had perfect vision in Nevuah? Only Moshe Rabbeinu and Bilam, yeah? But only Moshe Rabbeinu in the Nevi'im of Israel. That means even Avraham Avinu had Ispaklaria She'ein Me'ira, which was not perfectly clear. Or like the Rambam I mentioned earlier said. They had to have an interpretation. Even Avraham Avinu, as great as he was, he had to interpret the Nevuah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of Kachman es Bincha, through his own lens. It came as a form of moshel, it wasn't clear. For any other Novi apart from Moshe Rabbeinu, it's Ispaklari She'ein Me'ira. Therefore it needs interpretation. And therefore Avraham Avinu had to interpret it as some form of riddle moshel. Because his soul was of a very high stature, he was able to interpret the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu accurately. And he didn't have a leaning, an interest, a personal interest, lahoris heta, bekufnim tamim, with 150 different possibilities, lifter b'tzura acheres, now, like Avram, I'll explain my words. Yesterday I told you your children, your progeny is going to be through Yitzchak. And then you said, take your son and offer him up as an oila. And now you're telling me, don't touch the lad. וכל זה לא יחושב כלום בשעה שאמר לקדוש ברוך הוא ועליה לעילה. ופוטר עשה לנבואה שעילה לעילה את יצחק. וזה הניסוין אבל ציוו הדברים מאירים בעזרת השם. In other words, the nisoyin of the Akedah was to interpret the tzivui of Kachma es bincha yechidcha honestly, accurately. Because Avraham Avinu could have interpreted it in a way which maybe he means this, maybe he means that, 1,000 different ways of interpreting it, but I don't actually have to kill Yitzchak. But because of the whole nisayon of the Akedah was to interpret the Nevuah through an ispaklaria she'ein me'ira, through a vision, a lens which is not perfectly clear, in a way which was accurate. That was the Nisayon of the Akedah. Astonishing. Now, interestingly, and therefore, the Gemara, which I think helps understand this even better, is the Gemara in Megillah Yudalad on base. The Gemara says in Megillah, "V'yoshiyahu gufa hechi shavik yirim mashad legaba." The Gemara in Megillah says there were 7 female nevios, 7 female prophetesses. That's the right word. One of them was Chulda. Chulda lived at the time of Yirmiyahu. So Yoshiyahu was the king at the time, and he went to Chuldov to speak. What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu want? Says the Gemara, why didn't he go to Yirmiyahu? Yirmiyahu was the Navi of Klal Yisrael. Why is he going to Chulda, not Yirmiyahu? Says the Gemara, Heichi Shavik Yirmi Mashad Legaba, and go to her. Omri Debeir of Shila, Mipnei Sha'anoshim Rachmoni Yisheim. Women have more mercy. Why do when we make a Mishaberich for a Choyla, we always say the person's name after the mother's name, why not the father's name? Because women have more mercy than men. That's why it's connected to the rechem. The rechem where the child has been developed is rechem and rachmanis. It's the same word. It's the very nature of a woman is to have more mercy. So you know what? I want to go to a neviah, to a prophetess, to a neviah who has the ispaklaria she'eina me'ira, which is not a perfect, but her lenses are more rachmanis. So they all get the nevuah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but I prefer to go to Chulda than to Yirmiyah because she will interpret it through a lens which is more merciful. That's what it means. You interpret it through the lens which is your personality, your midas, your spiritual perception of things. I'll go to Chulda, not to Yirmiyahu. Amazing. And that really is what's going on over here. The Nisayon of Avram Avinu was that even though his nevuah was through an ispaklaria she'eina me'ira, a screen which is not very clear, but he was still able to interpret the nevuah truthfully and to go ahead and to do the Akedah. The contrast is Bilam. That Bilam, he thought he could interpret his nevuah through his corrupt vision to curse Klal Yisrael, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu Dafka gave him the nevuah in the form of Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah, ispaklaria me'ira, where there's no wiggle room. That he'll have to just say it as it is, and indeed he says, Ma tov olecha Yisrael. So that's Reb Shach's take on the whole Nisayon of the Akedah and the whole explanation of the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu and the difference between Bilam and Moshe Rabbeinu and all other Nevi'im. It's a fascinating piece.
I don't understand. You said Avraham had a nevuah that he should offer up Yitzchak.
So the question of Rav Shach is, it's a very clear tzivui.
Yeah.
You think about it, it's very clear. There's no wiggle room. So there's no wiggle room. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to do something, you do it. And why is this called Nisayon? So the Rav Shach answers, because the nevuah is given to, apart from Moshe Rabbeinu, through an ispaklaria she'eina me'ira, through a vision, through your lens, which is not clear. It's coming in some form of riddle, a mashal, and you've got to interpret it. The Nisayon of Avram Avinu was that I can interpret it with other means to try and think of other ways. Maybe he meant this. Maybe he says to me yesterday, your progeny is going to come through Yitzchak. So maybe what he meant was, of course I don't kill him and I'll just do this. That's the temptation. The Nisayon of the Akedah was to interpret the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu accurately, despite it being an ispaklaria she'eina me'ira, a lens which is not perfectly clear.
Was it really a nevuah, an instruction from Hashem? You're calling a nevuah.
Yeah, exactly. But that's exactly.
Words are clear. You mean
yes,
contradict something else.
But when I'm looking through my lenses, and my lenses are red, we're all seeing the same thing. But if your lenses are blue and yours are green and mine are red, we'll all see things differently. The words it's the same tree that's in front of all of us, but I will see a red tree, you'll see a blue tree, you'll see a green tree. Because I'm looking at this nevuah, these words, with my own frame, my own lenses. That's what it means. It's bakara she'eina me'ira. I'm interpreting what I see through my own personality, my spiritual status. That's who I am. And the Nisayon of Avram Avinu was therefore to interpret these words accurately and not through a distorted vision which could sort of somehow distort the message that was being conveyed to me.
It's struggling to understand because Moshe was also given instructions But he also interpreted sometimes in a way that.
But the difference with Moshe Rabbeinu was that he was given Mispaklar Me'ira. He was seeing it an absolute thing, and therefore there was no wiggle room for that. He saw it with just clear 20/20 lenses.
But he hit the rock. He was told to speak to the rock.
So how could Moshe Rabbeinu ever? In fact, the Meshech Chochmah says, by the way, in Parsha Shmos, if I'm not mistaken, that the Moshe Rabbeinu, because once he was set up as a Navi of Klal Yisrael, there was no room for him to err in the form of a Nevuah. Maybe there's a difference between a Nevuah and a Tzivui, and maybe that was considered a bit different.
How do we know that Arcade was any more of a Nevuah than Lech Lecha, all the other things that was instructions? And he did those.
But any communion with HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the Navi is Lechora through some form of Nevuah. How else is it constructed?
He didn't Vayomet. He just...
That communication is through a Nevuah.
We think, in English, Nevuah is to foretell the future.
It's a Pasuk in the Torah that the words were actually said, but you're saying the words weren't
That's
said.
it, yeah. The words were said. Not necessarily. No, the words exactly were said. Vayom Hashem Moshe. Hashem said these words to Moshe. How is Moshe going to see these words through his own Ispaklar Shein Me'ira?
But how's Aaron going to do it any differently than take your son? How's he going to?
He's going to put him onto the Mizbeach, and maybe he'll have a little nick, or maybe he'll put him there and then take him down, or 1,000 ways. The Shach says 150 ways to interpret it. But he's interpreting it through his particular own personalized lenses.
Why should he be interpreting it though? I agree with the others. It was a direct command, do this to...
But again, so I'll go back to my moshel. I'll go back to my moshel of the tree. Imagine there's a bimmer there, right? So we're all wearing different color lenses. We're all seeing the same bimmer, but through our own lenses, through our own personality. So you're going to say, but a bimmer's a bimmer. What's the confusion? It's the words are very clear. The answer is no, because you're seeing that as you are, not as it is.
But it wasn't a nevuah, it was instructions to do something.
So that's what we're saying. So you've got to say that it was actually a nevuah. The way HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks is through a nevuah. He hears the words, but I'm interpreting the words through my own framing, my own filter.
Yeah, even when words seem very clear, you may say something, and I don't hear the same.
I sent an email just now thinking. I sent an email. I had to speak to a certain student this week. So I was very clear what I said to the student, and I was in touch with them. And I emailed the parents. I said, "Look, this is what I said. Yeah, I'd like you to debrief with your child. Can you please email back to me and just tell me how it landed, how they understood what I said? Because I know what I said and I know what I meant, and I tried to be as clear as I could possibly be. But I'm sometimes that is totally misunderstood what I meant, and they come back and they say chalk and I said cheese." And therefore I emailed the parents. I said, "This is what I said, and can you please, I want to know what the kid, how it landed, how they understood it." And that's a good example of this.
Yeah, in fact, it reminds me, today my kids told me that the Federation have made a pronouncement because of the hot weather on Sunday.
Right, yeah, I saw that.
They said the following people may not fast.
Right.
And it was listed pregnant women.
Right.
And so my daughter said, so they're not, the Federation made it clear that you can't fast if you're a...
Right.
So it says may not fast.
Yeah.
What does may not fast mean?
Words, and you try and be as clear as possible, but with all of that, you interpret it as you want to interpret it. Yeah. Okay, we'll leave it there. Mitzvah Hashem, the second piece, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us a lot of strength and kayach and good health, and next year we will look at it. Mitzvah Hashem. Okay, Beseda.